Welcome back to the David F. House podcast. In this podcast, The Stress Solution, How to Reclaim Your Peace, I'm going to dive deep into how I live a pretty stress-free life, even though I have a lot of stressful situations. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm running a multi-million-dollar company, a coaching business, managing all kinds of people. But I tend to remain pretty stress-free. My Aura Ring tracks everything. And so in this podcast, I'm going to break down my method to live a pretty stress-free life and how you can do the exact same thing. Essentially, spiritual growth is actually all about undoing all of the stress that makes our lives miserable. And not only miserable, but I also break down about all of the health effects that stress has. So I think you're really going to enjoy this deep dive into overcoming stress so that we can begin to live a life of flow. Stress, it's a motherfucker, and it's coming to get you. Just joking. In this podcast, we're going to talk about how to overcome stress. I'm actually going through a good deal of what the world would deem as stress right now in my life. And I was asking my wife, hey, what should I talk about on the podcast today? She says, can you talk about tools to overcome stress? And so I started planning this thing out, and came up with this idea of the stress solution and how to reclaim your peace. And I think largely the interesting part about this podcast is like literally this is what the whole entire podcast is all about. But I don't think it's ever been so intentional like as it is today about really looking at stress. But when you do move up the scale of consciousness, when you do set the intention to grow spiritually, naturally you just become a less stressed out person. And so to get more intentional, I think it's going to be good because I'm going to uncover what I do to live a relatively stress-free life, but in what the world would see as like a highly stressed environment. And so I'm an entrepreneur, so we're constantly in a high stress environment, but I usually don't get too stressed out about things. And I wear this Aura Ring that kind of like gauges my stress all the time. And so I know like the level of stress that I'm kind of going through. But you can also just feel stress. Like you just feel that, oh, this is like really stressful. And so how did I get to this place of calm amongst all of this stress? And so just kind of give you an idea of like all of the stress that I currently have. I was just like writing I'm getting sued. There's a Ministry of Natural Resources out at Lungo Vita that it's like coming after us. They built this case that's like this gigantic folder, and they're coming to get us. I have tenants that have been in this commercial building that I've had for like 3 years. They're leaving, so I'm either gonna have to find a new tenant, or we might potentially move there, which is gonna be a bunch more money. We're going to Florida. We go to Florida every year for a month. The condo that we rent they told us that we can't rent it, and so we had to scramble and find an Airbnb for like quadruple the price. My wife and I have been like arguing a little bit more, and so it's like there's just like from the outside looking in, there's a bunch of stress, not to mention the fact that I'm just running a company, and it's like the constant stress of like making sure sales are coming in so that you're making payroll, making all of your payments, applying for mortgages. That was another stress factor, is that one of the banks that I'm working with, it was like, we're going to wait for another year of financials. And I'm like, you motherfuckers. And so yeah, there's just, from the outside looking in, this is like a highly stressful job. But like I don't want to say that I don't get stressed, that I don't get worried about this stuff, but like I think the thing that I've done is I have the ability to immediately notice if I'm having this reaction to some sort of news. And so I think the first thing that we have to do if we want to overcome stress is we have to identify what our stress is. And I think that this is like where, because the word stress has been given so much power, like doing research for this podcast, I'm looking through like what are people Googling about stress, and it's just like it's like literally endless. And so now stress, much like anxiety, it's become this thing, and people think it's like this thing that comes and gets you. And I know you don't consciously think it comes and gets you, but when we give it this label, it's just like we start to think that stress has power over us, but the reality is we created the stress and we can remove the stress. And so in step one, we want to just ask ourselves like, well, what are we stressed about, right? And so like, if I'm looking at my situation and saying, oh, I'm stressed, well, these are the things I'm stressed about. Okay, why am I stressed about these things? And so if I look at every single one of these, what I'm trying to look at is what button is being pushed at in me when these things come up in my life. And so like I'm being sued, money, right? There's also a thing in there about like people not taking personal responsibility, and I think it's unfair. Victim, like that's the button. The Ministry of Natural Resources coming after me. Victim, right? And also anger, like I'm just pissed. But underneath, because I do this work, underneath all mad is sad. So if I go beyond the anger, it's like poor me, which is victim. The tenant's leaving. Money. Condo falling through. Oh, that's not really. It is a little bit of the money button in me, but it's more so. It's inconvenience, which is going to cost me time. I'm just trying to do this on my own for me. So it's like, it really is money and effort, right? And so, and then fighting with Bree, which is my wife, if you're just the first time tuning in here. The buttons that come from that are like multiple, but a lot of it is still like victim. And I don't want to get too into that fight, but it's about victim for me too. So as I kind of like just did that exercise live here on the podcast, what I recognize is like my two primary buttons are getting pushed, which is my money, which is scarcity. And so the second I start thinking, oh, this is going to cost money, my unconscious, because this is where I was programmed, goes to, oh, I'm not going to have enough, because that was the thing I experienced over and over again as a kid. That was the pain that I've been trying to avoid my whole entire life. And so when that button gets pushed, that would create stress in my life. I would immediately start to become stressed. But because I've done this work, I then just recognize, and I can look and be like, well, you're fearful that you're not going to have enough, but you recognize that you will be okay in the pain of not having enough. Even if I lost everything tomorrow, I would be okay, right? I'd be able to handle it. Would it come with emotion? Of course it would, but I'd be able to handle the emotion. So when we get stressed out, what we're saying is that we can't handle whatever it is that we are dealing with. And it's like, I'm so stressed. This is what people say all the time. And so it's like, well, why? Like, life is not supposed to be like a life of stress. Like, we should be living a life of ease and flow. And so does that mean that stressful things don't happen? Fuck no. Of course they happen. They're all over the place, right? And so it's like, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to be facing stressful situations. If you're, if it actually, it doesn't even matter if you're an entrepreneur, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, but like, you're going to be in stress. And so like, it's like, there are going to be things that are like, require immediate attention and quick action, and you're not gonna know the answer. So in order to break free from that, we have to understand what button's being pushed in us. So for example, the money button was pushed in me with respect to a few of these things, and so then I just recognized, like, I'm gonna be fine. Like, I'm going to be completely okay. I'm okay if I have nothing. I literally am. I really, truly believe that. But my unconscious is showing something different when I get that little stress response. So that's just another opportunity for me to say, okay, let me take a look at it. Let me take another look, because obviously it's still there. Now, if you compare how I'm dealing with this, dealing with all of these issues compared to how my wife is dealing with it, it's like she's like stressed to the max, right? But I have this trust and faith that everything's going to be fine. I also have this complete in total belief that I can handle the pain that is being thrown at me. And so I guess the first step my first step was awareness. What are we stressed about? The second step is to be like, well, what are we stressed about, and can we feel it? The third step is understanding why that is such a button in us, right? And so when we are stressed, we have to understand, well, what button is being pushed? And it's pretty easy. I did it in 10 seconds here. It's like, why is this bothering me so much would be another way to put it. When you identify that, then you can say, well, when did I first start experiencing this fear or this pain? And then as you bring awareness to that, then you can connect that behavior, that childhood trauma, whatever you want to call it, to why you are the way you are today. And now every time that thing shows up, you can go, oh, that's because of this. That means that it's still in me. Let me feel that a little bit more. Let me just stay in that energy of not having enough, right? And so even as I'm saying this podcast, I'm recognizing there is still a little bit of that inside of me, the fear of not having enough. And even though I've done a lot of work on it, this is just a sign to do more. Now, what would it look like if I were to do more? Well, what I would do is I would connect to how it feels to not have enough, like in the body, because feelings are felt. That means they're feeling, you feel them in the body. And I would just stay with it. And the thing that's wild, even as I turn to it right now on this podcast, I go, this nothing. Like, I can handle it. Now, don't let saying it's nothing be dismissive, because in some ways that is a way to not feel fully. And if you don't feel this thing completely, it might still keep showing up for you. So recognizing that, you can say, okay, it's money. Ooh, how does it feel to not have enough? Ooh, tightness in the chest, pit in the stomach, just a sense of unease. Now, what I would do, I'm not going to do it on the podcast here, is I should just sit there and be fully focused on the feeling. I don't try and let any thought come in. The mind's going to want to say, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. You'll sort this out. But no, I want to feel like it's not going to be sorted out. Like, I want to feel the full weight of that emotion. And then when you sit there long enough, you're going to go like, wait a second, this is all I've been avoiding, right? All of this stress that's been ruining my fucking life and wreaking havoc on my health is because I don't want to feel the pain of not having enough. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been stuck here so long, right? And so as you begin to look at these buttons, as you begin to do this work, the stress, which, what is stress really? Stress is a projection to an outcome that you do not want, right? So if you project enough, we'll call it stress. It'll actually start to begin to have it'll actually start to show up physically in the body, right? Because you're projecting so much to some sort of future outcome that you don't want, that it's actually creating physical issues for you, right? Because you are so resistant to feeling that pain of that projection. So let's just say, in my example, I'm being sued. Where do I project to? If I let this stress just run wild and go unchecked, right? And this is how we get stressed, is that most people haven't ever had to take the step back to say, well, what am I stressed about? I'm stressed I'm going to lose money, right? Then as I connect to this lawsuit, I say, I'm stressed that I'm going to lose all my money. I'm stressed that my insurance company is going to cancel me. I'm stressed my insurance is going to quadruple, which is what will happen. And this is the thing that drives me nuts about these people that sue people, is that, oh, your insurance will cover it. It's like, yeah, my insurance will cover it, but then they'll quadruple me if they don't cancel me, right? And so the lawyers of the world are killing us. And so that causes stress. If I continue to project to this lawsuit, it's going to take time, stress, energy, stress, money, stress, and I don't check it, right? I don't say, what's really going on here? It will just keep running wild. I'll never let it go. I'll take it home with me. I won't be able to sleep. I'll eat more to try and escape the stress. I'll drink more to try and escape the stress. And then I die of a heart attack. And it's like, well, why did I die of a heart attack? Well, it's because we never actually asked what we were stressed about. And so the recognition that the stress is a projection to an outcome that you don't want. The outcome that you don't want is some sort of feeling you don't want to re-experience in your life. Re-experience, meaning we don't want to feel that way ever again, meaning we felt that way once before. Where was that, right? And not that it's overly necessary to get to like the root of this original incident, but it is nice to make this connection. So now, let me walk you through, after kind of me going on this rant, what do I do? Okay, stress shows up. Something happens. You're getting sued. Stress. Okay, what am I so worried about? What am I so worried about? I'm worried that I'm going to have to spend a bunch of money. Okay, will you be okay if you spend all that money? Just a rational question. Yeah, I can afford it. Okay, great. Will you be okay if it bankrupts you? Yes. Also, I can handle being broke. I can handle the pain of not having enough. I can handle the judgment that will come from the world that I didn't make it. I can handle not being good enough. So it's like, okay, I can handle all that. Is there any feeling still in you that you need to like sit with and feel? Probably. Okay, let's go there and let's sit there. Wait there. Let the energy of that feeling burn out. Breathe through it. It's like, imagine if you were fearful of heights and you were standing on the top of a ladder. You'd be shaking. Your heart would be racing. You'd be sweating. But if you just stayed there and breathed through it and stayed fully with the feeling, eventually you would stand up tall and you'd be completely fine on the top of that ladder. This is what we're doing when we connect to the emotion that we're avoiding. We stay with it completely. And so now that we've done that, every time stress shows up, we just, in a flash, walk through that process. And guess what? The stress goes away. Right? Now, if the stress repeatedly shows up, that's showing us that There's still more deeper work that needs to be done. But even with the awareness, we are going to be 99% better, right? Just by saying, oh, stress is here. What button's in it? Oh, it's this. Oh, that's tied to this. Am I okay there? Yeah, I'm okay. All of the overthinking, all of the projection stops, right? So I guess, what is stress caused by? Stress is caused by a projection to an outcome that you do not desire. But then I was just like looking, Zach was saying, hey, why don't we look at some of the things that stress cause in the body? And it's like, oh, okay, let's look on the mind. Memory, impact, mental health. It's triggering your fight or flight response. So stress activities activate, the amygdala, your fight or flight response, often overriding logical thinking and decision making. So it's like when you get stressed out, you come home from work, you're not thinking clearly. Your wife says one thing, you go off the deep end. And it's like, this is an example of how being overly active in stress is going to affect your life. On the body, immune suppression, heart health, weight changes, cholesterol and aging. On energy and sleep, adrenaline overdose, disrupted sleep, overall health, digestive issues, muscle tension, reproductive health, social behaviors, isolation, behavioral changes, decreased patience. It's like it kills your motivation. It kills your like resilience, And so it's like stress is probably like the number one thing that if we were able to reduce it, would have the biggest impact on our overall level of well-being, right? And it's relatively easy to do with just a little bit of inquisition to breaking free from that. So like I always see, like when I was even doing research for this, I see like YouTube things like how to cope with stress. It's like, well, I don't want to cope with stress. I want to recognize what I'm stressed about. I want to sit in that energy. I want to sit in that discomfort and then be okay in it, right? I don't want to try and cope with anything. Coping would be going to drink alcohol. Coping would be smoking weed. Coping would be eating a bag of chips. It's like, I don't want to cope. I want to break free from this thing for good. And so when we set the intention to say, okay, I want to break free from stress. I don't want to live a life of stress. We shouldn't be living a stressed out life. Life should be a life of flow. You should be able to be running the biggest company in the world, which a normal person who isn't aware of stress would just die in the face of all of that stress, where you have, let's just say you have thousands of employees that if you don't, make it happen, they're all going to be out of jobs. Everyone's going to hate you. It's going to be public. Like, think how terrible that would be. But it's like, if you're not able to process through those buttons, then it's like you'll never be able to handle that situation, right? And so I want to get to a place where like I can live a life, I can be in the most stressful situations and be completely fine. I mean, ultimately my coaching is about becoming unfuckwithable. And what does unfuckwithable mean? It's like nothing out there, no one's suing you, no government agency coming after you. And if you go into business, this is like it's just going to happen. It's just the nature of doing business. You are going to be attacked, right? And so it's like, this is the game you got into. So you better be able to handle the stress that comes along with being in that game, right? And so I want to get to this place that whatever is thrown at me, I'm okay. And if I'm not okay, I have the ability to step back and say, why not? What button just got pushed? And if I can solve for that, and if I have the courage to face whatever it is that I'm avoiding, I'm going to live a stress-free life. And like, I'm kind of like a testament to that. Like, it's like, I put myself into these situations and I'm, my Aura ring tracks all my stress and I'm like a relatively chill person, right? I'm like not very stressed out about things. Things cost multiple times over the course of Lungo Vita. I had no idea how we were going to pay for things. And this would send most people into like a whirlwind spiral, stressed out, isolation, whatever it would be. But I just trusted everything was going to be fine. So I guess that would be the last piece that I want to add here to stress. Stress is the belief that everything's not going to be fine. Stress is the belief that you don't have control over the outcome and that outcome is going to be negative, right? But when we move into a place, ultimately this is where we get to after we kind of break through all this emotional shit. Ultimately we get to this spot where we move to this place of surrender. And I just made a video about that. You can go on my YouTube and watch that. But it's like in surrender, we have this complete and unwavering faith that everything is going to be okay. And when you get to that spot, it's like there's nothing out there that's going to bother you. right? Because you even begin to see like the good in it. Like even like with what I'm going through right now with the tenant leaving next door here, and I'm like, oh man, like what are we gonna do? We're gonna get another tenant in there. Like we just got the podcast room all done, and it's like all of this stuff. But it's like, no, maybe this is an opportunity to like create an even better space, right? Maybe there's an opportunity to create an entire studio where we can film all kinds of content, where other people could come and use it, and we could soundproof it better. We could do like there's always like good in the bad, and we are trained. Our ego is focused solely on the bad, and that's how we survived. So of course we look at the bad. But when you learn to step out of ego, when you learn how to have the courage to face everything that you've been avoiding, all the emotional pain that you're avoiding, and then when you've learned to surrender completely, where you're just like, I have faith that this is all going to work out. And even if it doesn't, even if I die, I'll be fine. Like that's the ultimate surrender, is recognizing that even if you die, you're going to be okay. Then what is there to be stressed about? Right? And so while I'm giving this podcast and talking about how I overcome stress, doesn't mean I don't experience stress sometimes. Yeah, I feel it a little bit. But pretty much the second I feel any hint of stress, I just ask myself, what's going on, right? Something's off, right? I notice it. And then as I notice it, then I just do the work to break free from it. So it doesn't mean that stress will never show up once you get to, and I think you can get to a place where that button will never be pushed in you ever again. It's completely deactivated. But if it does, where I'm at, just so you know that I'm not perfect, just because I'm talking about this stuff, where I'm at is I'm okay if it shows up, because I actually see it as a gift. And I say, well, what is still inside of me? And if I read through my list again, you'll see what's still inside of me is a little bit of victim and a little bit of fear of poverty or not having enough, right? And so I'm like, oh, thank you. That's just showing me that there's more work to be done, and that's what I'll go and do in my private practices, which will be like meditate on it, feel the feeling, journaling about it, reflecting on it, leaning into the pain that I'm avoiding as opposed to stressing about it, trying to control the outcome, right? That's essentially where we want to get to. So I hope that was useful and beneficial. I definitely think that stress is like this huge thing that has been given a lot of power because of the label that it's been given. But so let's just take back our power, because we are ultimately the ones that have the power over this thing that is just a name that we gave to overthinking, essentially. So if you got any value at all, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Head over to my YouTube channel. You can watch my surrender video and my intention video that are coming out soon. See you again next week.